A long time ago, once did a video entitled What and Who is Godzilla? In which wound up covering a lot of the Showa era Godzilla and what I thought of him. And why I like his character so much. Yes, for those of you who don't know, I am a rather big Godzilla fan, and I want to talk about Showa era Godzilla in this video. Hello everybody, I'm Adam Noyce of AN Productions, and I hope you'll sit back and take a listen and try and understand why I'm obsessed with Godzilla so much, and here specifically talking about Showa Godzilla, and why I have been and always will be so fascinated with the character study of the kaiju itself. Because there's so much here to talk about. Be it the Dark Godzilla, the Light Godzilla, or the transformation of thus, and hopefully I'll be able to cover it all here. I'm not saying I'm going to, or I'm not, because this is quite frankly something that books, quite frankly, can be written on, and really I wouldn't even really be scratching the surface. If I really wanted to do this, it would be like an 8-hour long video, and I don't want to do that to you guys. So make yourself some tea, sit back, and I'll try to explain to you why I've always found the Showa Godzilla specifically so fascinating in terms of its character. Now, we all know where Godzilla had his starts, where he was an allegory for the atomic bomb. Yeah, we all know this. We all know this. But just to basically recap, is that Godzilla is nothing but an allegory for the atomic bomb and nature's wrath on humanity. And basically is mankind's imagination personified, if you really look at it. And what I mean by humanity's mind kind of personified is that we were all very scared this was the time of the Cold War, and during the 50s and early 60s, that was when the Cold War was running the hottest, and it wouldn't get any hotter really until the mid 1980s, and so on and so forth. But anyways, the mid 50s and early 60s was when it definitely was the scariest time to live in the world, because we didn't know if we were going to blow each other up or not. And yes, that sentimentality always remained until the end of the Cold War in the 90s. It never quite got as hot as it did here. And, everyone was just sitting around and just, having those stupid-ass duck and cover drills and so on and so forth and everything like that. And everyone was afraid of who would touch the button first, who would launch the first nuclear missiles, who would cause the nuclear holocaust to end all of life on this great green planet that we call Earth as we know it. And what did the Japanese do? First off, it was genius that the Japanese did this in general, was because the Japanese were the only country to ever be actually nuked during a war. And they remain to be so, thank God. And I'm not saying thank God that they were bombed, I'm saying thank God that they're the only country that was bombed. No one else had to suffer through the horrors of that. And, of course, Japan had really been hit the most because of all these nuclear testings and so on and so forth. And look at the example of the Lucky Dragon number 5, which was victim to the terrible fallout of the hydrogen bomb. And all the crew just about died, I think. And after being exposed to what they described as snow, when really it was just the metallic debris of what the bomb was being tested on, just raining down upon them. And they all became terribly sick. And this was striking Japan at the time. So Japan, more than many other countries, were terrified because they're caught between these two superpowers. They're caught between the USSR, the Soviet Union, and the United States. And they know damn well that if the war breaks out, they're going to get caught in the middle of this and get torn apart. This was 9 years, 1954 was 9 years after the end of World War II. Not even a full decade. And Japan was scared. Rightfully so. Japan was scared that they were going to get ravished once again by a war. And this time the war wouldn't have been really their fault. The war would have been something that really circumstances kind of got them grouped into. And so thus came Shiro Tomoe, Yuki Tanaka, Eiji Tsuburaya, and anyways, they all created Godzilla, who was the embodiment of the Cold War and the personification of, more specifically, Japan's fears, but in many ways the world's fears of nuclear war and nuclear devastation and what we're doing to ourselves and what we're doing to this green planet. And Godzilla, of course, is that. Godzilla is wrath, is Mother Nature striking back. And sure, Godzilla 2014 definitely played on that personification of that way of nature, balancing itself out, though. To me, it doesn't scratch the surface of what the original Godzilla 1954 was able to do. But that's what Godzilla is. Godzilla's angry with humanity. There was this great poem that I read that a fan wrote about Godzilla, and it said, "I was the last of my kind," talking about Godzilla being like one of the few dinosaurs alive or in hibernation. "I was the last of my kind, and you made me the first. And you, being humanity, dropping the bomb. And I thought I could never be any lonelier." To me, that's Godzilla in a nutshell. That is the best form of Godzilla, is that right there. And the reason for that is because I love loneliness. And I'm not saying I love loneliness. I'm talking about when a character is isolated, when a character is lonely, when a character yearns to have another one of its kind come into being. And that's what happens with Godzilla. Godzilla was the first of his kind, and he was angry at humanity and angry at what we had done to him. We turned him into this horribly disfigured creature. And so what does he do? He lashes out at us because he knows we created him. He lashes out at him because we have done nothing but cause Godzilla pain ever since his creation. Nothing but pain. And this goes all the way until 1965 with Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. Even in many ways, that is the same thing, where we do nothing but cause him pain. And what do I mean by that? We depth charged him. We always, try to kill him whenever he lands. We electrocuted him. And so on and so forth. And this doesn't just go with Godzilla 1954, because Godzilla 1954 died. And then we have Godzilla Raids Again Godzilla, which really becomes the Godzilla for the rest of the Showa series. And that one's the same way. We've done nothing but cause him harm, and that's one reason why he comes back in 1962 in King Kong vs. Godzilla. It's because he's so fucking pissed off at humanity, because we do nothing but harm him. Maybe, the way how I look at it is in King Kong vs. Godzilla, Godzilla was finally at peace. He was basically wanting to die at that point. And we froze him. At the end of Godzilla Raids Again, they freeze him in a block of ice. And Godzilla's like, yes, I'm okay. And then in comes the USS Seahawk from King Kong vs. Godzilla that reawakens Godzilla, that has enough radiation that leaks out that Godzilla was kind of alive already, but it revives him, wakes him up, and he breaks out of the iceberg. And again, that's because of humanity. It isn't some natural force that he breaks out of the iceberg. That's because he literally gets reawakened from humanity's curiosity. And now, I'm not saying humanity's curiosity is a bad thing. Actually, on quite the contrary. I believe curiosity is what will carry us into space and what will drive us into the future. But really, Godzilla is, again, the embodiment of humanity's curiosity gone wrong. I mean, if you look at the Robert Oppenheimer, who spearheaded the atomic age, unfortunately, and he completely regretted it, there was a reason why he created the atomic bomb. They were originally going to use it on Germany, right? They were going to use it on Germany to end World War II. And then the Germans surrendered. And then they were going to use it on Japanese, and they did. But he continued to make the bomb bigger and make the bomb worse in many ways. And of course, he has that quote where he says, I am become death, the destroyer of worlds, where he quotes the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu scripture. And first off, a brilliant decision to use that in the Godzilla 2014 teaser. That was a brilliant decision. Too bad it just didn't fit the movie very well. But here, the reason why they kept going, the reason why Oppenheimer kept going was because they were curious. Let's make it bigger. Let's make it larger. Let's see how big we can get this. And eventually it snapped. He's like, oh my god, there's no reason why I need to be working on this bomb anymore. There's no reason why I need to make this thing bigger. The war is over. But he kept working on it. And that is when humanity's curiosity drives them into almost insanity. Almost like Dr. Serizawa, if you look at it. The Daisuke Serizawa. Where there was no need for him to make the oxygen destroyer. In fact, he was doing something that he thought would benefit humanity, like Oppenheimer honestly thought he was going to do with the atomic bomb, was he thought he was going to end the war. And that's, in many ways, the atomic bomb did end the war. But he kept going, and that's what happened to Dr. Serizawa. But we're not here talking about Dr. Serizawa. That probably could be for another video. But because of humanity's curiosity, and in King Kong vs. Godzilla, it is their exploration of the North Pole, they free Godzilla again. They free Godzilla, and he causes nothing but devastation. Goes immediately for Japan because he feels like he's heading home. In many ways, Japan is his home, and he starts destroying everything, and in many ways starts bitch slapping humanity back into their place, which is okay. Which I think is a wonderful, wonderful character thing. Anyways. Other than that, there isn't much characterization to Godzilla in King Kong vs. Godzilla. Many of you know my opinions on that movie and that I don't really like it, either cut of the movie, Japanese or English. And then we have Mothra vs. Godzilla. Mothra vs. Godzilla, Godzilla wakes up, and very much so, it's like, I'm fucking done. And he goes what does he do? He immediately goes after Japanese cities. He immediately goes after where the people are, which are the cities, and he destroys them. Because, again, he sees humanity at the time as his enemy. You see, here's where things start getting interesting. You know, Mothra, and I've always I did this whole video on Chopper Pilot 5 called Mothra, where I basically explain Mothra's character, so I won't get into too much detail here. But Mothra has always been the representation of both courage and goodness, or heart, the heart of mankind, in any continuity. Computer's about to die. In any continuity, be it Showa, be it Heisei, or be it Millennium. Well, Godzilla usually is the evil one. So it is really cool to see this force of good, Mothra, who in very, very much so is the underdog, go up against the king of the monsters, who is a representation of pure evil. And that is actually played upon in Mothra vs. Godzilla, made in 1964. As for the fairies convincing Mothra to go up against Godzilla, and I love that how even though Mothra is dying, to protect her race, to protect her species, she goes up against Godzilla anyways, which actually comes back in Ghidorah the three-headed monster, which we'll get into a little next. And Godzilla really doesn't change any in that. Godzilla is still angry, and he's still mad at humanity, but Mothra managed to defeat him, despite our desperate attempts to stop Godzilla. We were not able to stop Godzilla. It's like us trying to control the weather. It just doesn't work. In the end, we are not able to control Mother Nature. We can help prevent things by building levees, by building things like that, but ultimately, if a hurricane's going to hit, that hurricane's going to hit, and things are going to be done. The bad things are going to happen, and that's the same with Godzilla. Godzilla is the hurricane. If Godzilla comes up, right, and you see Godzilla walking towards you, you can do things to maybe slow him down, or you can do things maybe to try to prevent him from landing, but you cannot stop it. He is an unstoppable force, and I mean a completely unstoppable force. And especially in the Showa era of nature. That is until Ghidorah the three-headed monster, and this is where things are going to happen, that I genuinely like. Who turns Godzilla to be good? Mothra, the kaiju that just defeated him in the previous film. It's Mothra that manages to convince Godzilla to stop hating on humanity and to realize that this is your world too. And what does it take for him to see that? It takes an alien creature that has already destroyed a world, depends on which version you watch, either has already destroyed Mars or Venus. That creature has completely destroyed that planet, and has now come to Earth. And what does that ultimately mean? Is that Ghidorah, or whatever, is going to kill him too. Now, admittedly, that is a very selfish thing. Godzilla's like, well, fuck. If Earth gets destroyed, then that means I'm going to get destroyed. Which at first you think is a good thing, but then he sees the bravery of Mothra, and he sees Rodan, another one of his kind. At the same time, even though they fight, they're almost fighting over territory. And what does it do? It takes him seeing this little larvae Mothra, not even adult Mothra, who is much more capable of fighting Ghidorah than larvae Mothra, but he sees larvae Mothra, baby Mothra, going up against this horrific three-headed dragon. That's bravery at its finest. And Godzilla sees that, and he's like, if that little dyke is so willing to die to defend Earth, then maybe that's what I should do too. And there's that great moment in Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, where both Godzilla and Rodan turn around and just watch Mothra go up against the dragon. And just watch. It's almost like a switch flips in Godzilla's head when that happens. Where he's like, God damn, that little fucking worm is right. And so what does he do? He teams up with Rodan, right? He teams up with Rodan. And together, Mothra, Godzilla, and Rodan, they are able to defeat the foreign invader, which was Ghidorah. And Ghidorah flies away, and so on and so forth. Now, there's also a really great moment in Invasion of the Astro Monsters as well, and that was when the two astronauts drop Godzilla and Rodan on Planet X, and they're about to fly away, and they leave Godzilla and Rodan there. And Nick Adams says, I almost feel bad for him. Look at him. It's like they're and Godzilla and Rodan are looking at him like, what are you doing? Why are you leaving us here? These are the only humans that they know of on this planet. Why are you leaving us here? We helped you defeat Ghidorah. And when they're flying away, the monsters just look up at them. And a great choice by Akira Ifukube to go with a very somber piece of music, too. It makes you feel genuinely bad for both Godzilla and Rodan in that, as they fly away into the distance, leaving the two monsters basically on their own and at the whims of the Exilians. And I love that, how they look up at them and like, why are you leaving us here? We helped you so much. Why would you leave us here? And I think the only reason why Godzilla, in many ways, if you look at it, what happens in the next movie, where Godzilla goes immediately up against humanity and starts kicking their ass, I think the only reason why Godzilla turned back to being good was because in Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster, Mothra was there to take all the people away. And I think Godzilla sees Mothra and is like, oh yeah. Because in continuity, that would be the same Mothra that convinced Godzilla to be good in the first one, in the first, or in Ghidorah, the three-headed monster. So he'd see that Mothra, and at least is my interpretation, and he'd be like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to help these guys, aren't I? And that's the reason why Godzilla is so angry, is because we left him on Planet X, right? And suddenly all these humans are here and they're blowing shit up and they're doing some terrible things, and he's like, fuck that shit, and he's basically taking out his anger on the Red Bamboo. And so when Mothra comes and takes all the innocence away, Godzilla looks at Mothra and he's like, oh yes, I remember why you did what you did to me. I remember why you kicked my ass in Mothra vs. Godzilla. I remember why you told me to defend the Earth, not necessarily humanity, but the Earth, in Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, and thus he becomes good again. However, there was something that has always played in Godzilla's character throughout the Showa series so far, and that Godzilla is lonely and the only one of his kind, which leads into the next Godzilla movie, Son of Godzilla. Now, I'm going to be honest, I don't believe that that's Godzilla's real son, because we always asked, well, what happened to Mrs. Godzilla? I believe on that island, that buried underneath the rocks, that egg Minla was in a state of hibernation. The rocks are just cold enough to keep the egg fertilized, but not too fertilized to hatch or warm to hatch. And so it's in a state of hibernation. Because when it cracks open, or when it hatches, is when the experiment on the island that the scientists do on the island goes wrong and everything heats up. I believe that is when the egg suddenly comes back to life and hatches, and that's when Minla comes out, just as the giant mantises are about to eat him. Godzilla gets this call. I think the reason why he heads for that island isn't because he's like, oh, what is that? It's because he's like, oh my god, I recognize that. That's another one of my kind, which inspired me to do that kind of supersonic elephant-like call in the Godzilla saga, which that's how they get in contact with each other. They can contact themselves all the way across the earth by using this almost supersonic cry that it's so high up in the frequency that humans can't think it, that can't hear it, and that's what happens in Son of Godzilla. Except in Son of Godzilla, they say it's brainwaves because of that plane at the beginning of the movie. Anyways. And so when Godzilla sees that there's this little one there, he's like, well, fuck that shit. He kind of adopts it. He's like, god damn it. And he's not a very good dad, let's face it. He hits Minla over the head, steps on his tail for him to breathe his atomic breath, leaves him there high and dry after destroying the mantis things. But then what's interesting is that no matter what happens, Godzilla always comes back. He doesn't have to come back, but he does. And that's a great character thing. Like, first Godzilla walks away, and then Psycho feeds Minla, right? And then Godzilla comes back. He's like, oh yeah, Godzilla comes back. He always winds up coming back, and it's definitely personified in the ending. When the island starts snowing because of the weather experiment, and Minla can't deal with it. Minla can't cope with how cold it is and how much snow is falling, and so he can't walk anymore, and it looks like Godzilla is going to leave him to fend for himself. And to be honest, if it was the previous Godzilla from the previous movie, that's probably what would have happened. But no. Godzilla does an absolutely beautiful thing in terms of his character. Godzilla comes back. He turns around and he sees this child, what he once was, trapped in the snow, unable to move. Maybe he thinks back to his father. Maybe he's thinking back to his mother. I don't know. But something causes him to go back, and it's that moment there. And he comes back and he takes Minla, holds him tightly to keep him warm. Even though Godzilla could have practically saved himself from hibernation and just gone back into the ocean. No, he comes back to Minla because he knows that if he's not there for Minla, Minla's gonna die. Beautiful moment in terms of Godzilla's character. And it's from that point forward that I think Godzilla is not cold-hearted. I believe Godzilla becomes a very warm-hearted creature with not necessarily humanity's best interest, but now it's more like he's got the Earth's best interest at hand. And this is, I think that there is the moment where Godzilla officially becomes the good guy, which leads into the 70s. It's where Godzilla is always the defender of humanity and always the defender of the goodness in humanity and defends all this stuff. It's kind of like the story of Barabbas in the Bible in many ways. Barabbas was a horrible person. He was the person that the crowd at Jesus' trial wanted freed in replace of Jesus. And Barabbas was a revolutionist who wanted the same thing as Jesus, which was the freedom of Israel, but they went through it in two different ways. Where Jesus was peace, Barabbas was war. Barabbas had multiple wives, was a rapist in some cases, was a rather horrible individual. But through the goodness of Jesus, and through the goodness of what he saw Jesus, this man, go to the cross, much like how Mothra goes to fight Ghidra, and he sees that and he changes. Not instantaneously like Godzilla. Barabbas doesn't change instantaneously. He takes a slow progression, much like Godzilla. And I couldn't help but notice the parallel in terms of the story structure. And I'm not saying that they were inspired by that at all, because there's only really like 6 or 7 stories ever written, ever. But I noticed that character development there, that character structure, and I laughed, and I thought it was a very interesting point. Kind of interesting how all these stories can kind of intersect and intertwine in terms of their plot, in terms of their story, in terms of their characters. Kind of like how the original Star Wars is nothing but a retelling of King Arthur. In many ways. Actually, no, that's exactly what it is. It's a retelling of King Arthur. Now, there's something interesting. Notice how I'm skipping Destroy All Monsters. That's because Destroy All Monsters happened in the future in the Showa era and not in the 70s. To me, Godzilla doesn't have much of a character. He has badass moments, but not much of a character in the 70s. With the one exception of Ghidra, the 3-headed monster. Now, I always wondered why Godzilla never really fought Hedorah until the end of the movie. I mean, he did kind of rustle Hedorah up, but never actually fought him, and that isn't until the end of the movie, when he loses his eye, really. Which is a great moment, by the way, where Hedorah pokes his eye out, or burns his eye with some of his sludge, and then Godzilla distracts Hedorah and then takes out one of his eyes. I just love that, a little bit of revenge. A nice little character moment there. But I always wondered why Godzilla is always seen flailing his eyes around, his arms around, and not directly confronting Hedorah. And I came to this conclusion, and I admit this is all completely overanalyzing and stuff like that. But here's what I think, and you can agree with me or disagree with me. Hedorah was a creature that came from space, according to the movie, that was mutated by the pollution on Earth, and thus created what it is, which is a horrible, disfigured creature. I think even worse off than Godzilla. And Hedorah is angry at humanity for that reason. That's why he lands and he absorbs the smoke and then he kills so many people. It's because he's angry at humanity, just like Godzilla was in 1955 through 65, 10 years, a decade. And so Godzilla sees this, and he remembers, I think he remembers back to Mothra, and what Mothra did to convince him that the Earth was good. And so he sees Hedorah, and he's like, I got to try. He says, I have to try and convince this monster that that the Earth is something good. Despite all of their flaws, despite all the hardships, the Earth itself is good. It's home. Like everything, it has flaws. And so that's why you see Godzilla, flailing his arms, and I think he's trying to convince Hedorah, stop this. You don't have to do this. The Earth can be good. The Earth can be your new home. But Hedorah doesn't listen. Hedorah is almost more pig-headed than Godzilla was. Actually, he is. And it takes Godzilla losing his eye for him to realize that. Now, unfortunately, a lot of this is kind of destroyed in Godzilla vs. Gigan, since he immediately goes after those two monsters. Though, to be honest, I only think that the reason why he goes after Gigan is because he sees King Ghidorah, and he hates King Ghidorah so much. But anyways, that's what I think in Godzilla vs. Hedorah, what that is, or what, why Godzilla acts the way he does, and ultimately kills Hedorah, because he realizes that this monster, there is no possible. It's almost like King Ghidorah. There is no possible redemption for this monster, and he has to die. Kind of like in War of the Gargantuas in many ways, but that's for another video. Whew. Now, I've always liked how Godzilla teams up with Anguirus in Godzilla vs. Gigan. I've always liked that, how he basically befriends all the monsters, basically becomes the leaders, because Godzilla is king of the monsters, and by far Godzilla is the most powerful out of all the Earth monsters. And so it only makes sense why he kind of becomes the de facto leader of all the kaiju on Earth. Which makes that ending scene, or the end battle in Destroy All Monsters, where he leads the charge against King Ghidorah, epic as fuck. He's like walking back and forth, almost like he's rallying the monsters into fighting King Ghidorah, even though they're pretty sure they don't need rallying, because they all know who the enemy is, because their homes are getting destroyed. Really great stuff going on there. I think absolutely wonderfully done. I think Showa Godzilla as a whole, in my opinion, has the most interesting character out of all the series. Not my favorite. My favorite will always go to Heisei Godzilla. But it has the most interesting character development out of all of them, because he literally does a 180. He goes from being a badass monster of destruction to defender of Earth. And it's for that reason that I like analyzing Showa Godzilla the most out of all of them. Again, I just want to say this again. He's not my favorite character. That goes to Heisei. But he is the most fascinating one to look at. And those are my thoughts on him. So, I really hope you enjoyed. Do go on Facebook and like my new movie called Which Way They Walk. Just type it up and you'll see it. Hit the like button. Subscribe to AN Productions down below. Leave a comment. Tell me what you think of Showa Godzilla and what you think his character is. Tell me if I'm a complete idiot, or tell me if I'm actually sane. All comments are welcome. Just be respectful. That's all I asked of you, of both myself and others. Just please be respectful. Like AN Productions on Facebook, and please, if you want to support Backyard Film, or if you want more videos like this, go on to Patreon and become one of my patrons. If it's just donating $1, I don't care. That money will be well spent, and I will promise you that I'll get out the best possible material as possible and keep making videos like this. So anyways, in conclusion, this is Adam Noyce of AN Productions saying, sayonara.